I was thinking maybe we could start by sharing a story about how each one of us got here. It seems like it's been a long road to get to where we are, the three of us sitting on a stage together here at the M in downtown St. Paul, here at the Pioneer Building, where we have three Indigenous people doing great work in the arts, serving as Indigenous arts leaders in different capacities. Our paths crossed in grad school, where we were all non-traditional students. And you both are phenomenal artists and scholars in your own right. Can you speak to your journey and how you came into the work that you do?
Well, first I just want to say thank you for having both of us here, and also to acknowledge that as a Patricia woman, I am a guest here in Dakota Territory. But I'm just so honored to be here, and thank you everyone for showing up tonight. It's really exciting to be here on stage with two longtime friends and colleagues, and to think about everything we went through as graduate students, but also the work that we're all doing in support of Indigenous perspectives and voices in the art world. And one quick story that I could share is that many people don't know this, but when I was writing my dissertation, I slept in Kate's attic. And it was the final weeks of wrapping up my dissertation writing process just before submission, and Kate let me crash in her attic.
Well, you made me soup.
I made soup. But anyway, so what I want to say is that obviously in this process or this journey, none of us can get to where we are alone, and that we have people, friends, family, colleagues who support us. And so I guess, I don't know, I think I thanked you long ago. I think I thanked you in my acknowledgments, but you can never thank people enough, I believe. But in terms of my what I do at the Met, I would say that I have a love of museums, and I know that that sounds strange for an Indigenous person to say that, but how this started was when I was 7 years old, and I grew up in Chicago, and we went to the Art Institute on a field trip, and my mother came along with us, and my mother was someone who struggled a great deal with various health issues, including extreme anxiety and PTSD. But she came on the field trip because she was trying, and when we arrived at the museum, she just couldn't do it, and so she was taken away, and I was small. I was only like 7 years old and had no idea what was going on, and they separated us. They took my mother somewhere, and then they took me with the children, because at that time in the 70s, we didn't talk about those kinds of things that we talk about now. And I was whisked away with all the other kids and the teachers, and I was very frightened. But one of the teachers took me by the hand, and she walked me around the Art Institute to look at paintings. And what I remember was this calming, soothing feeling came over me as I was looking at these amazing works of art. And I still have that feeling when I'm in a gallery or I'm in a museum. There is something about engaging with aesthetic expressions from many artists, from many backgrounds, that is very soothing and calming for me. And there's something about being around things that are beautiful that is very calming for me, and that's one of the reasons why I do what I do.
My turn? Yeah, I just wanted to express my gratitude for being invited to be here with you all today, and it's just so great. I feel like we were just talking about all the great times that we had, and yeah, just reiterating what Patricia said about that, having those friends to support you along the way was just really, really incredible to have then, and to continue to have, as we move forward, and these different journeys that we've gone on since then. And I guess, just kind of thinking back for me, I had no idea that museums was anything that I could ever work in. And my family never went to museums. And it wasn't until, this was in the 90s at my former place where I used to work, the Eiteljorg Museum actually had a small exhibit on my tribe. And so my great aunt was like, "You're coming along to this." And so it was the first time I'd been into a museum. I didn't even know what to experience. But I was with her and with other people from our community, and being there and seeing these items, most of them had been on loan from National Museum of American Indian that were collected in our community in like 1908, 1910. And seeing these things that I'd only seen in old family photographs, and that people said, oh, you remember this photograph, this person was wearing this, this item, and that having that connection, to those people that wore those and that made those, and in that moment of being there with my great aunt was, I didn't think I'd get emotional. But just having that deep connection there, and just like that, it was just like, having all those multiple generations, like, around you, and just that feeling of, just, that's what inspired me too, that I needed to learn how to do ribbon work, which a lot of these items were ribbon work, and people in our community weren't doing it at the time. And so that led me to doing that, and then that's how I ended up becoming involved in museums, where museums were asking me to make items for their collection. So I was working with museums in that capacity, and then so that kind of had planted the seed. And then when I was in grad school at the University of Minnesota, then a museum studies minor came up, and I was like, oh, this looks interesting. So I went to the first class and was like, yes, I love this. And just really saw the potential of, of what museums, Thank you. But just kind of, saw the potential that museums could have, and like kind of going back to that initial experience that I had, and what could I do to make museums more reflective of us, and incorporate our voices, and I guess just thinking of like, I just think museums have such a great potential, and I think they're just getting there. I think museums are on the cusp of really kind of re-envisioning what they can be for the communities in which they are surrounded by, and the communities in which their collections are reflective. So I'll stop there.
Absolutely. I think that, this next question you kind of both already answered, but I want to sort of think about it in a little bit more depth. Thinking about the fact that museums are often uncomfortable spaces for us as Indigenous people. There's reasons. There's historic reasons for that, right? These are places that were created to document, objectify, and showcase us as people who were not expected to survive colonization. And yet here we are in the Pioneer Endicott. The idea that change can be driven from within these same colonial institutions today is understandably not one that all Native people embrace. And yet it's a path that we've all chosen despite, and maybe because of its challenges. Deani Whitehawk, my dear friend, at an event at the Walker Arts Center, once described it as being inside the belly of the beast. Can you each share about this tension and why you've decided to claim your space here?
Do you want to tackle that one?
Well, I should say that you had mentioned earlier, and I was just so glad that Scott brought it up, but I'm a trained fine artist, and so I have a background in printmaking. Painting and drawing is my BFA, but then printmaking and photography was my MFA. And so when you're training in fine arts, you're already in the belly of the beast when you're training in fine arts academically, or you're engaging with the academic world. So it is always interesting to me when I do hear scholars who are within the academy who are working hard to change institutions from within, because it's really difficult and change takes time. And I would say that in my role at the Met, I really do see myself as a facilitator and someone who is bringing in Indigenous voices and experiences and engaging with communities in collaboration and in partnership. Like, I don't think that I could do this work if I had to do it any other way. I wouldn't want to do it any other way. And working in partnership with Native communities has always been at the core of what I've done academically, and then also in my museum leadership role, and now as a curator. And so for me, it is just translated across these different roles, and it works. And so that is my goal, and that was my goal when I stepped into the role at the Met, that I was going to do everything that I could to elevate Indigenous perspectives in everything we do, in our exhibits, in our programs, in caring for the collections. And we've been steadily doing that work. One of the things that is a challenge is that sometimes institutions are framed publicly by a narrative that just is, it's a very stubborn narrative that people keep wanting to reiterate over and over. And one of those with the Met is that we're not doing anything in terms of repatriation or NAGPRA. This is something that has come up again and again and again, even though we have been. And so I would say that's probably one of the most frustrating things working within institutions, is that once there's a story or a narrative on paper and in print, it keeps getting regurgitated again and again. So breaking down that narrative is also part of what I do. And now I'm forgetting the question, and I don't even know if I answered it.
You absolutely answered it. That was perfect.
There was one other part I was going to say. But I mean, that's really why.
Yeah.
And in, I don't know, the whole belly of the beast thing, I think that if you're someone who is academically trained, you've been in that belly for a while. You can't deny that. And so I guess it's a place that there's connections between scholarly work and academia, and then what we do in museums. It all
Absolutely.
they speak to each other.
I think about that a lot in terms of, I didn't know I was going to go into museum work when I was in graduate school. That wasn't the plan necessarily. And I wasn't even in graduate school for a career. I was there because I wanted to tell a story with my dissertation. I wanted to tell my family story, and that was a place where I could do it. And so thinking about how, we've been able to transfer those skills as graduate students to the work that we do as leaders within the museum field and within the arts fields, I think it goes to show the ways in which not only are interdisciplinary degrees absolutely excellent, but the ways in which we can transfer those skills and really think outside the box. And it also goes to thinking about, how do you indigenize spaces? You bring your community with you, you bring your backup, right? And you partner, and you do that work together.
Yeah, it's just making me think of sort of that first instance, like in museum work, where I kind of butt heads in that. And it was, I guess when I was at the Science Museum, and thinking of in that work with those seeds and sort of the, I think just in general, kind of like collections and how museums think about collections. And I always go back to there's this great book by a woman named Miriam Klaver, where she talks about sort of like museums think about like the integrity of the object, and indigenous peoples think about the integrity of the peoples. And so like, how can museums, what are those ways in which that sort of that materialized was, that idea of like, well, there's these seeds, and as I started working there and going, reaching out to different Native organizations and going to different food sovereignty conferences and all those things, and everybody was like, oh, can we have those seeds? And I was like, I don't know, let's try and figure out how I can, let's try and figure out what we can do. And I think, kind of the initial reactions was, well, we can't just start deaccessioning our collection and giving it out. But then it was like, well, we're growing the seeds out, and then we're returning those seeds from those ones that are deaccessioned. So we're not actually returning the, deaccessioning and returning those. It's the, again, sort of like, what are the collections? The seeds are living beings. They're not these sort of like static objects that the way to preserve them is just putting them on a shelf, but by having them, in their communities, in the places, and being grown by people. And that's how you preserve, the seeds. And that those are very much integral to those revitalization movements. I mean, you've seen that in, the native food sovereignty movement. I mean, it's just so amazing just seeing where that is right now. So.
Yeah, I love the way that, the work that you did in preserving those seeds and thinking about those seeds, thinking about, I come from public history, and, in terms of how we're involved in Native arts are a part of everything that we do. Seeds are art. History is art. It's all about storytelling. It's all about connection. It's all about growth, right? And so thinking about how we can sort of help the world and help each other develop empathy for one another, and sort of think about the ways in which we have different definitions of art in different communities, right? Mm-hmm. And I think about that a lot in terms of, as a Native leader of a non-Native organization, I could be leading an all-Native organization, and I choose to be here at the M because I think that there's something really valuable in showing that we can do many things and we can be many places. And the fact that our strengths and the things that we love and care for in our communities are valuable for everybody and impact everybody, and so I love those examples. I think those are really strong. I do have one hard question. Okay. It's not tied to that last question, but I do want to ask it because I think it's something that is kind of a hot topic right now. So Native and Indigenous people are not monolithic, obviously. One need only look at us here on stage, each just one representation of our own community or family story, to see that we as American Indian, Native American, Indigenous peoples are very diverse. There is often a lack of understanding and even consensus about who we are, as well as who we claim as representatives of our communities to the public. And there are certainly identity politics in the arts that can be difficult to navigate through, adding in issues of those who self-identify or culturally appropriate. What do you see as different this time around as our society and communities navigate through these issues in 2022? I told you it was a hard one.
That's what you mean this time around.
Because I think that this is an ongoing conversation, and each year we have a different example.
Oh.
We have, this year we had Sasheen Littlefeather and what happened with her. And locally we had an artist and an issue that happened when somebody claimed to be Dakota who in fact was not Dakota. And we have institutions grappling with how to handle identity politics, and we have our communities grappling with how to handle those things, and they're complicated. Right? Mm-hmm. You're like...
Yeah, well, I guess, I don't know. I mean, yes and no. I think in some instances, it's just as simple as following like the Indian Arts and Crafts Act, you know? Where, I think a couple instances, like had they done that, then they wouldn't have been in the situation they were in.
Yeah. That might speak to how there needs to be some changes in some process. How come you can get a college degree and show your tribal, or to get a fellowship or scholarship, you have to show your tribal card, but for public art projects you don't, right?
I think it's, if you're going to work with Native art, whether you're a curator or you're working in museums or in any other capacity, you have to follow the law. And that's what we do. We follow the law. And originally we know that some of the laws, including the Indian Arts and Crafts Act, which I think it was initially created in 1938, or I can't remember the exact year, 1930s, was not created by Native people. It was created by non-Native people as a measure of authenticity, specifically focusing on the Southwest. And we know that whole history. There were very few Native voices when it came to that original iteration of that law. Then it was modified or drafted in the 1990, I think it was. And there were more Indigenous voices, Native American voices included in that redrafting. But in order to support Native work, Native art in these institutions, you have to follow the law. But that places us as Indigenous peoples in very awkward positions at times. And we have to have very difficult conversations with artists or with communities. Sometimes it's not even a question, it's not even about enrollment. Sometimes it's about, you might have an artist who is enrolled, but whose community has come out and said that they don't appreciate that artist's work, that artist is not representing them as a community. And so there's those tensions as well. There's many layers to it in it. And I think in regard to the work at the Met, what we do is we follow the law. And we've had to have difficult conversations about individual artists and with individual artists. But it's a question of doing what's right for the community, going back to the community or communities, and listening to many people. And I think we all know, even within specific communities, there's many voices. There's not always agreement. It's very diverse. But I also wanted to say, there was something about that you said in terms of representation, but also just looking on the stage, how diverse we are as Indigenous peoples. When I first started at the Met, one of the first things that I did was, in the Art of Native America gallery, there was a map that was on the wall that delineated the different regions where the works in the gallery that were on view, where they came from. And it was very awkward. It was very ethnographic, and I was really uncomfortable with it because it didn't demonstrate the intercultural connections. It didn't in any way communicate seasonal migrations. It didn't. There was no movement. It was very stagnant. And so that was the first thing that I had taken down, was that map. And I had some pushback, and people asked me, well, why did you take that down? And it helps people to situate themselves in the gallery to understand where different items come from. And I said, well, when you're looking at a Jackson Pollock, there's no map on the wall that shows you where Jackson, Wyoming is there? And they were just, and so why would we have that? And so there's that part, but also what we did install was an active land and water statement, and a statement that clearly communicates how we will move forward working in partnership with Native communities and foregrounding Native American voices in everything we do. And also reflecting on our own, what we've done as an institution to the environment, to the land and water, and that understanding that Native American and Indigenous communities are inextricable from the land and the waters. And that is something that we practice and we recognize, because each of the works in the gallery speaks to homelands, it speaks to the environment, it speaks to aesthetic continuity. And I love walking through the gallery with community members because you learn something new each time. And I love the way that we all might look at one basket, looking at a basket, and someone, oh, I love that it's made with the sedge root, or it's made with, this or this type of grass. And one person will say, well, I love, that twining approach. There's, hundreds of stitches in that basket. And then someone else will just say, that basket looks thirsty. All of these things, these different ways of looking at something is really incredible. And that's one of the things that is really moving for me with working with all of these items.
I love that. Well, now I have a more fun question. A little easier question. Thinking about Native art and sort of the state of Native art and Indigenous arts today, thinking about what are some of the things that are happening, the trends that you see that are really exciting. I personally collect earrings. And I have these beautiful earrings I'm wearing by Avis Charlie, who is a painter who you might see behind me in the beautiful painting, Smile Now, Cry Later. Avis's work, she's Dakota and Navajo, and in that work she has this woman who's wearing earrings by Melina Parker and a necklace by Jeremy Red Eagle, and these are people in our community who make jewelry, who make craft that we love, and we wear their materials, and we now see them in Vogue magazine. And so for me, I think jewelry in particular is something that I'm really excited about. What are you really excited about when you think about Native art today?
I'm excited about bow ties. I couldn't help it. Gosh, I don't know. I just love so many things about Native art. I think there's just, and you know, no longer working in a museum. Like I feel like maybe, and also because of the pandemic, I'm like, oh, there's probably so much more that's gone on in the last couple of years that I just don't feel like I have a good handle on. But I don't know. I feel like there's so much more awareness too. You know, like you see like speaking of like cultural appropriation, you know, with like fashion industry and like them having to get their hands slapped multiple times. And then finally, like, I think, you know, working with, you know, Native designers, but the Native designers, like you're wearing Jamie Okuma right now. And so, you know, like they're really like getting, you know, I think a spotlight. And I think that, you know, I think there's this growing awareness, sort of just in the general public, that wow, Native people are actually still around, and they're like making art that's not like, you know, from like the 19th century, because I think that's another thing. Like, you know, when so many people think of Native art, they think of, you know, the quote unquote traditional, and it's like, what is traditional? You know, like in their minds, it's like, again, sort of like pre-contact just post-contact, you know, and not seeing like Native art on a continuum, and that contemporary, and I don't like using those words like traditional and contemporary, because it makes them seem like they're different, but like it's very much grounded in those customary forms. And I think there's so many artists that are doing that there's just so many. I just love seeing like people like making things that reference sort of their customary art from their communities, but using new materials. Like I was just at NMAI this past weekend, and they had the Preston Singletary Raven in the Box of Light. I think that was the title of it. But it's about telling a Tlingit story about Raven and daylight, and it's all done in glass, and it's like amazing. He's able to make the glass look like wood sculptures, or you know, it was just really mind blowing. And so I think there's just so many amazing things going on right now, and I think too, I've been really happy to see First American Art magazine come out too. I mean, before that there was like, what's it called? Native American Art magazine. It was by a non-native sort of company that did a bunch of other sort of art related magazines. Most of the people that wrote the articles in there were non-native scholars. And the First American Art magazine has so many Native people. I mean, it's like all Native run, Native editorial board. And mostly Native people writing about Native art, and it's awesome. So, you can't tell, I highly recommend getting a subscription.
Do you work for them?
No, but
Well, I'm right there with you, Scott. I'm really excited. In my role as a curator, I can acquire works from up-and-coming artists, and so that's one of my main goals, is acquiring works from artists who are not the hot, the hot new thing, and even if they are, that's okay too. But I've always been someone who's worked a little bit against the grain. Like if there's an artist who everybody's getting right now, then I don't want that artist. I will go in a completely different direction, and so. So recently, we've acquired works by a number of highly recognized, well-known artists, and since I've been there, our contemporary collection has expanded considerably. So we now are acquiring through gifts, through direct acquisitions, works all modern through contemporary. So We just were gifted a beautiful Charles Luloma bracelet. We were gifted a Helen Hardin painting, and I absolutely love Helen Hardin's work. On the contemporary side, also we just acquired, I was super excited to sign the paperwork for George Morrison, first time at the Met. So I'm really proud of that acquisition. Also, Elias Not Afraid, an incredible cradle board. Elias is an up-and-coming artist, but also just, again, acquiring works and just seeing that, just that glow of younger artists' faces when they are just so excited to be at the Met, be part of the Met, and to be really shaking things up. Elias's work, for instance, the cradle board, is called Life After Death, and it is not only completely beaded, but it also has bullet casings on it as well. And it's talking about children in boarding school systems. And so there's just all these powerful ways, aesthetic ways that, as Scott was mentioning, that contemporary artists are engaging with this aesthetic continuity, this continuum, in very striking and powerful ways that I love to encourage and I love to see.
Absolutely. I want to see that piece. That sounds
It'll
amazing.
be on view in our 2023 Art of Native America rotation.
Okay. Well, I'll come visit. So museums have the power to build empathy in our society. Do you think we need to build infrastructures for care and healing within museums? How do we model empathy from within? I'm totally asking this as an executive director of a museum. How do we do it?
Yeah, that's a good question.
I'm happy to go first if you want us to
Sure,
think about your
yeah.
answer. So we just actually had a program on November 4th. It was called Sound and Healing, and it was all about sound as a method of healing for Native people. And part of how this program started was that we have on view, we installed two jingle dresses in the foyer of the Art of Native America Gallery, and one of them belongs to Dr. Brenda Child, to her daughter Beane. And so that dress it's a contemporary work, and it's on view in the foyer of Art of Native America. But then next to it is a historical work, which we borrowed from the Minnesota Historical Society. And then we have those two works in dialogue with this wonderful piece by Courtney Leonard, who is a Shinnecock artist who works in ceramics. And all three of them speak to pandemics. So I think many of you know the history of jingle dresses, that they started during the 1918 flu pandemic, and that the sound itself and also dancing together is part of a healing or prayer. But also Courtney's work, which is called Contact 2021, is made of these wampum shells. It's her ceramic interpretation of wampum shells, and she pressed her thumb during the pandemic into clay over 3,600 times, and then hand-tied each of those shells. First she painted on them and she glazed them, and then she fired each of the individual shells and then hand-tied those with sinew onto a canvas backing. And it's the same type of canvas that is used on whaling ships and sailboats, because there's this long history of the overharvesting of whales and how that's impacted the Shinnecock community. And so we have those works in dialogue with one another in the gallery space. And so we decided to have a program about this, and we invited Dr. Brenda Child, who is a professor at University of Minnesota Twin Cities, to give a talk about the history of jingle dresses, but have her in conversation with Robbie Robertson. And Robbie is part of, who's an important musician. Many people refer to him as the native Bob Dylan, he was the front person for the band. And they talked about healing and they talked about sound. And it was something completely new at the Met. It was something people didn't know, like sound as a method for healing and as a method of prayer. And so I think, that's one way that you can open up new dialogues and open up connections to healing through the artwork, through the items that you have on view, and do a little deeper dive into the history of those items.
Absolutely. Dr. Brenda Chow is also a board member for the M, and certainly an inspiration and somebody who has been a mentor to all three of us, right?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
She was on, I think, all of our dissertation committees.
Yes.
Maybe hiring too.
Yeah, I'm just thinking, I guess just thinking of like museums in general. I mean, just have a lot of healing to go, just because they're colonial institutions and part and parcel with colonization and just that history of collecting and why things were collected and how they were collected. And there's just so many those foundations, like that's not never going to go away. And I feel like museums have to constantly address that and come back to that, and as reminders of like, how do you acknowledge that, but then how do you move forward, and also with, I think a lot of museums are predominantly white institutions, and that there's so much that needs to be done from every level in a museum, from the board down to any other position. And that was something, that I saw in museum work too, is just, how predominant that is. And, you can hire, like I was at my former place, I was like one of 2 Native people in an entire institution dedicated to Native American art. There's something wrong with that, right? So I think there's a lot of things that need to be done around, like diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice, that museums like are just starting to do. But I don't know if, it's like, until you address those things, I don't think it can really, any healing can, I don't know. I guess maybe after you're saying that, I feel like doing that, also helps with,
I think
addressing some of those too, right?
I hear what you're saying, but I also think that it's important, like you're saying, to acknowledge that like every museum collection comes out of the colonial process.
Yeah.
Even the National Museum of the American Indian,
Yeah.
and oftentimes people don't want to see that.
Yeah.
It's a federal institution with a collection that started with over 800,000 items collected by one person who hired people to go out internationally to collect across the Western Hemisphere. So we're talking about Indigenous people from the entire Western Hemisphere, not just within the boundaries of the United States. And that's really important, because that also goes back to not only healing question, but also how you asked how things are changing this time around. And I think that it's important to understand that there are so many restrictions or parameters on our thinking about who a Native people or Indigenous people are, that I would say now, we have the highest number of Indigenous museum leaders more than ever before across the country. And that's important to recognize. And because of that, we are now seeing this opening up and questioning of settler colonial borders. These borders that were imposed on Indigenous communities that had direct relationships with each other forever and still do. And so, for instance, my mother's community is a Pueblo community, the Purepecha, and they had direct connections and relationships and family kinship ties with Pueblos in New Mexico. So there's all these conversations that are now opening up.
Yeah.
But I agree too, in order for that healing to happen, you have to acknowledge that you're a colonial institution. You have to be open about it, not try to hide it, and then make the changes that need to be made appropriately and according to Indigenous protocols. That's the only way that I know of how to change from within. And I think it's possible, but I think it just takes time, and it happens more slowly than perhaps some of our younger colleagues. And I know now I sound like a little old lady, but But when one of the things that scares me is that I hear all the dialogue, like decolonize, give it all back, all of those things. Just the NAGPRA process alone takes years.
Absolutely.
Years.
Yeah.
So that part would be very frustrating, like just, handing things back. It's not going to happen like that.
And it needs great care.
And then also the idea of decolonize. Well, when you ask people, well, what does decolonizing mean to you? You will get a different answer from many different Indigenous people. So it's really hard for people just to even agree what that looks like. And then what does that look like at each of our institutions when we work in such diverse institutions? Mm-hmm. So I think it's, we have to understand that it's not a one-size-fits-all process. It's going to look different every place that you go. Now I feel like I'm really talking, getting fired up. But anyway, I don't know.
You're not a little old woman. You make great soup. But you're a very wise woman. And I love the way that you talk about that in terms of the borders as well, because when I came in, as the executive director of the Minnesota Museum of American Art, number one, trying to figure out, part of why I went into American Studies was to figure out what I felt about in terms of being an American as a Lakota person. And then I came to the Minnesota Museum of American Art, where I was questioning, well, what is Minnesota? And if we're going to represent Minnesotans, then we have to think regionally, right? And we can't think about just within these borders and the normal sort of outline. These aren't our borders. And so I love thinking about the fact that, as Indigenous people, when we come into these leadership positions, we kind of push back on some of these sort of outdated notions, right?
Well, it's a way, it was imposed on Indigenous people as a measure of control, of keeping us within certain boundaries and parameters so that they could have access to the resources. We know that now.
Yeah.
That was the goal. And now, yes, we're pushing back on that in every way that we can. And what I love about what's happening right now, all the change that we're seeing, is that everybody is making change with the tools and the skills that they have. And I like that. I like that it's so diverse and that everybody is contributing in one way or another to that change.
Absolutely. So the three of us here, we're all parents and active members of our communities. Can you talk about how you draw inspiration and strength from your work as parents and community members?
Yeah, I just thinking of this wonderful moment that I had with my daughter when we got when we lived in Indiana, a Traditional Arts Indiana Master Apprentice Fellowship. And so I applied for it, and because my daughter had been wanting to learn how to do ribbon work. And she was 9 at the time, and I was like, I don't know, she's 9. But, and it's like, I never underestimate, your children and just like the potential that they have and the wisdom and knowledge that they already have. And it was really wonderful going. We went to the Cultural Resources Center at National Museum of American Indian to look at some of those items of ribbon work in the collection, and just from we used our language as much as we could when we were around them. Because I said, they miss hearing that. They miss hearing us speak our language around them, and to let them know that we're there. And that, from the things I had taught her up to that point, I was just amazed at what she could see in those items when they brought them out. And I just have so much, I don't know, just thinking of like myself at that age, there was, our last fluent speakers died in the 1960s. And so when I was growing up, nobody was speaking the language. I mean, you'd hear like some words or a prayer or maybe a song. But, just like thinking of like what the generations now have that I never had, and like where's she going to take that forward? And I think that I just have so much hope. So, yeah. And so I think, just in a lot of those different things that involved in our community, just seeing so many of those kids that have come through all of the different, camps and things that we have, and I always help with those and doing a lot of art-related projects and those types of things. And some of them have just like, they're just doing amazing things. It's just, yeah, it's just,
Well, I love that you ask about our families. My family keeps me going. My family keeps me grounded. And my children, my husband, my daughter, I do this, this work that can be really, really difficult on days, or many days actually. Especially as Scott was mentioning, when you're one of, one or two Indigenous people in an institution, you draw upon that connection with your family. And I would say too, my ancestors, praying to my ancestors every day for strength and for guidance to do the right thing always. That's something that I have to do on a daily practice, especially being in the presence of items that weren't always acquired in the best ways possible, that can really wear on you physically and emotionally. And then also colleagues, connecting with colleagues who are going through similar experiences and being able to share about that and what they're going through at places that they're working. And just thinking about my daughter, so she has a concert tonight, and I was, kind of sad that I couldn't be there. But it's not the first time because of the work I do and the location. There's a lot of commuting and all of this, and so she was like, "It's okay, like it's okay, don't worry." And she's really into jazz, so she plays 5 different instruments, and she plays tenor sax, baritone sax, electric guitar, acoustic guitar, like the drums. Like, she loves music, like it's her way, and it's always been our way of connecting as a family. Language, I don't know, we speak in this very musical language with each other, and so she wants to study jazz. And when I shared that with someone at the museum, so this is not even related to your question, I'm going off on a total tangent. When I shared that with someone, my daughter is a jazz musician, and she wants to study jazz, someone said, "Indians like jazz?" And I just thought that was shocking. Like, yeah, we like jazz, and there was this idea that, as Scott was mentioning about the artwork, that Native people only like Native art or Native music or all of these things. And one of the things I love about being in the role that I'm in is that I can place Native and non-Native artworks in dialogue with one another, and blow all of those boundaries and parameters, away. Right now we have an exhibit where we have Courtney Leonard's work that speaks to Shinnecock homelands on Long Island in dialogue with William Merritt Chase, who's a 19th century landscape artist or painter, and also Arthur Dove. So to have an up-and-coming young Native artist in conversation with these big hitters of American art, like, to me, that's exciting. And to think about younger generations and where they're going to take that next. Yeah. And so when I think about family, I not only think about my daughter and my husband and my children. When I think about family, I think about all of the people that we're all working together to do something different, and to really make big change right now. So I don't know, I think of family in many different ways.
Absolutely. We come from communities where we are often taught and told to think small, and I think that the 3 of us, part of what has helped us to get to where we are, both professionally and personally, is that we didn't listen to that, right? So, what are your wildest dreams for the future? And what on the horizon are you excited about?
I guess I could talk about something on the horizon I'm excited about is a couple of years ago we started working with, it's kind of a partnership between my tribe, Oklahoma, Peoria tribe, Oklahoma, and University of Illinois. And so we're looking at these robes that were collected in our homelands in the early 1700s. And are now in the Musée Branly, if I pronounce that correctly, outside of Paris. And so there are these amazing robes that were painted in all these sort of geometric, abstract patterns, many of them representing special beings like thunder beings. They've never, as far as I can remember, they've never been back here. They've always been, at this museum and in different sort of locations that just recently become part of the broader museum collection. And so we did like a blog on it in terms of like looking at how we interpret these from different perspectives. So having a historian, a linguist, an artist, having all these different sort of perspectives on how we interpret those. And so now we're doing, we took that to another level, and so we've done some projects where we brought in this amazing artist to help us learn how to do hide painting on these robes, which was awesome. And just to understand more of the process and everything before we actually go to France and look at them, which we were going to go next year, but we realized that we need to do a little more relationship building with that museum through sort of the process when we started reaching out to them. So 2024, there's going to be a contingency of Peorias and Miamis that we all get to go and visit these robes with potentially bringing them back and doing a tribally, sort of a co-tribal curated exhibition on those. So I'm super excited about that.
Well, I love that you just returned from Europe. I went to Europe this summer and to look at a work at the Ashmolean, actually, that we're looking to borrow and bring back. So that's a related project. But what I would say about thinking big is that, so there are three things that I want to say. And the first is, in terms of thinking big, for the first time ever, we had 6 Native American contemporary Native designers in the Costume Institute's fashion show. And so it was the first time in Met history that we had this strong representation. And so it was really exciting to see Jamie Okma and other artists who were included in that exhibition, which is a major exhibition that is in alignment with the big Met Gala. So the artists get a lot of representation and attention. So I won't stop. I'll keep pushing so that we can have more and more and more Indigenous designers, because they deserve that type of representation. The other thing I would say is that I'm working on a project right now that involves 60 Pueblo community members as curators for an upcoming exhibit for 2023 of Pueblo Indian ceramics and pottery. And so that has been a major project and is completely new to the Met. We've never done a community curated project like this. And so it's a learning process. It's a process of growth for the institution, as well as as the Pueblo communities as well, just working in partnership to bring this project to the Met. So we will have over 100 pots, ceramic works on view with the Met, and also another gallery at the Vilchak Foundation. And so that's just been a wonderful exercise and learning process. And again, there's a lot of growth and dialogue happening. And then the last thing is, in terms of thinking big, I am a strong believer that Native American Indigenous people shouldn't only be curators of Native American art. we should be curators of European paintings, of African and Black American art, of Asian art, I think we should be curators in every department, and of many different media and aesthetic expression, and that is my big goal, that we have Indigenous representation in every department at the Met or other institutions, and that's my big dream.
I love it. I love the fact that, here we are in downtown St. Paul, and the three of us are alumni from the University of Minnesota, and we're making waves across the country, across the world in these different spaces. I always like to think about the M, where we're situated here, where the rivers come together. And the fact that this is really a place that guides us back out into the world. And so it's no coincidence to me that the three of us are here talking about these very topics. And I think that it's incredibly important to help the public and to have these conversations where we really break down some of those barriers and some of those stereotypes in terms of who are we as Indigenous people in this region, right? That we're much bigger than what people think we might be. And we look different, and we're doing all kinds of amazing things, right? I know when I came to work at the M, one of the pieces of advice I was given by somebody that I really respect and admire was, make sure that the first show you do is not a Native show. And I automatically thought, but why can't it be a Native show? And why can't it be a Native show and a show that has Native people in conversation with other peoples? Why can't we do both? Why can't we have it all? That we need to, yes, having a Native American gallery is wonderful, but we also need to be throughout the space, right? That we don't need to be parceled out anymore. That we, like you said, we need to be in every department. We need to be everywhere. That we can be executive directors, that we can be program officers, that we can do all of these roles and contribute in distinct ways that I think are really valuable. How are we doing on time, Laura?
I know that was my job.
What's that?
Maybe time for questions.
Okay. So we did ask for Q&A ahead of time. And so I'm just going to look here to see if we do have a few questions that some of you submitted to us ahead of time. Let's see. From your perspectives, what aspects of traditional nonprofit culture must change in order for Native leaders to flourish? That's a fun one.
I would say, I'm like jumping right in, how we do fundraising.
Oh my goodness.
Huge. There is no question that there are other priorities at many institutions that outshine or overshadow Native American and Indigenous projects and exhibits. And so I think that it's really important to remember that all of this work that we do needs support.
Absolutely.
I think that's huge. And although you're saying, all these different roles that we can, do and do well and, and be successful, we can't do that we can't be here without the support.
Absolutely.
And so I think that's huge. I don't know how fundraising will change.
Yeah.
I don't know how it would shift, but it has to, because it is so incredibly taxing on people who work in this business when you're trying to do all of the creative work and support your colleagues and support artists, and then you also have to do this additional fundraising. Like, it's something that keeps me up at night.
It certainly keeps me up at night as well. And I think that one of the things that sometimes we don't often talk about is the fact that as Native people, I know I come from a culture that it's not our norm to ask for things. Our cultural way is to give away, not to ask. And so for me to learn how to be in a room with people who don't look like me and to ask for money is something that I have had to uncomfortably learn. And it hasn't been easy. And luckily, I've got an amazing team, and Kate Tucker is here somewhere, who supports me and helps me to learn how to navigate being that kind of leader, because we absolutely have to. It's the reality of the world we're living in. But at the same time, what you said in terms of how taxing it can be to do the creative work, to support our colleagues, to create these healthy environments where we can be productive and be, and support community artists, and at the same time carry that financial burden piece is hard. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Gosh, I don't know.
Do we have what time? Do we have time for one more question or no?
I think one more.
Laura never says no. So.
Someone who has that.
All right, let's see. Yeah.
I didn't know you can submit questions. Can I ask a question?
Because I love and adore you, yes. This is Maggie Thompson, who is a wonderful artist in our community, Ojibwe artist here.
In your roles, or for artists like myself, how do you differentiate between authentic and transactional relationships within the museum world?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because I feel like a museum, museum field, it sets it up as transactional, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like, how do you intentionally and consciously work against that? And I think just, building those relationships. It's just like having those interpersonal relationships with artists.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like should come first.
Yeah, I think finding fellow individuals who have that same passion for storytelling and the beauty of being able to express who we are, a part of it comes from seeing each other's hearts, to kind of reference your recent work. It's something that takes practice, and it's about relationships, just like everything else, really.
I would agree with both what you're both saying, and also it's about our relationship with ourselves, right? And so I think it's really hard to be a transactional person when you're an authentic person, right? But that can mean setting those boundaries within the museum practice, right? Because you're going to have to be protective of yourself. I'm a strong believer that, I know I keep saying, I'm a strong believer this, I'm a strong believer that. One of our most important roles while we're here on this earth is to return to our core self, our true self. And that true core self, which is that little fire that's in all of us, gets covered up by layers and layers and layers of all kinds of stuff that we all carry with us. And eventually we shed those layers as we go further and further on. And the more you shed those layers, the more your authentic self you are. And I know that sounds really weird and all of this, but this is something I've been thinking about. And so if you're shedding those layers and you're returning to your core self, it's pretty hard for you to be just a transactional person or a fake person or to have fake relationships. And so it goes back to those relationships that you build with each of the artists who you're working with, and also the community members who you're working with. Because I can guarantee you, people will spot when you're fake. Mm-hmm. They can tell right away. And so I don't know how any other way to be. And I think that's what you're saying about your heart. That's, your original, your core self, why you came here in the first place.
And I think sometimes that's often why we end up in these positions where we work in community engagement, where sometimes within museums our jobs are literally to teach people how to talk to our people, right? And I know in some positions that I've been in, I've often felt like I'm kind of a filter, or the medium the mediator, or, the in-between person between community and the institution, which is always an awkward place to be. And that can lead to serious burnout and emotional exhaustion, and it often does. And so understanding that core piece, and I think that's part of the reason I put the question about, our families and thinking about ourselves as mothers, as people, is it's important to remember who we are, no matter where we are, right?
I agree.
Well, and with that, I know we're running over, and so I wanted to ask our dear friend Kate Tucker if she wanted to come up. She was going to do a closing for us. But I also just want to thank all of you for coming out tonight and being here with us, for having the chance to have this dialogue, to have this conversation here. The three of us probably last sat in a classroom together at the University of Minnesota down the river, and so to have this little this reunion here, to come back together here is really meaningful, and I'm proud of us. Oh. I have to say. So, Piramaya to both of you.